All right, you guys can all hear me? We're good? Sorry, starting late. I'm Clint. Thanks for showing up. Just curious, we don't have a lot of time, and I know I'm starting a little bit late, so I'll go through this relatively quickly, I guess. I'll show you some stuff. How many people here have heard of the app or used it? Okay, well, one question at a time. How many people have heard of the app? All right, cool. How many people are using the app? All right, so less. Okay, so that's cool, thank you. It's relatively new, and so what I'll go through a couple slides, and I'll just jump in and do a demo. And I don't think I'll get through everything, but we're over at the Apps Island, so if you want to come over and chat, again, it's new, so we're looking for feedback, ideas, suggestions, all that kind of stuff. So let me just kick this off. So really kind of conceptual how we think about where this app fits in is, you have the ArcGIS platform for GIS analysis, and then obviously if you're kind of more in the design world, your kind of go-to platform is probably Adobe, right? And then if you're a cartographer, anyone here identify themselves as a cartographer, or are you guys all devs? Anyone self-identify as a cartographer? Okay, or you designer? All right, cool. Pure designer. Okay, cool. Everyone else is kind of a devy person, I'm assuming, yeah? Like code and stuff? Okay. So you're probably more on the GIS analyst side. So if you're a cartographer, you probably kind of sit in the middle somewhere where you'll do some of the stuff in ArcGIS, but then ultimately you might want to bring some stuff into Illustrator. And so what this app is trying to do is kind of bridge those worlds a little bit better. And again, we're new, and we're adding functionality, and but that's kind of where we see this app and where we want to go with the app. So the basic principle is bringing in content that you have inside of the ArcGIS platform, your services, your web services, and getting that into Illustrator and Photoshop in a clean, organized way. That's really what the application does. And the idea being is once you get that data inside of Illustrator and Photoshop, it's in a clean, usable format, right? So GIS is for the analysis and the data visualization, and that's really what this tool does as well. It's more of a data conversion tool or a data visualization tool. If you're going to be doing design, I mean, that's what Illustrator and Photoshop, so focus on the design for that application. So really it's a tool that bridges those two worlds where you do the analysis and you do the data visualization on the ArcGIS side, and then if you want to do the high fidelity design, do that in Illustrator and do that in Photoshop. So that's kind of its workload. So the other thing this is useful is in a lot of organizations, either large or small, it's really just the number of people on each team, is you need to share your geographic assets with someone else. Maybe that's yourself, right? Maybe you do some sort of analysis online, and then again you want to kick it over to Illustrator, and that's you. But in some larger organizations, maybe you have a PR department or a media department or a graphic design department. A lot of times it's the GIS team that does the analysis and does some of the mapping, but then you need to share it with the design team. And so that's really what this tool is useful as well. And I'll show you a couple simple workflows where you can kind of collaborate through those teams. So instead of talking through it, I figured I'd just jump in and do a demo, as this is a demo theater. So let me kind of show you the workflow and give you a little bit of background on the app. And let me grab my phone here as well, because I want to be conscious of the time for the next presenter as well. So let me grab that. Okay. So I'm running on a Mac, if you can see. So it works on Mac. It also works on PC through Illustrator and Photoshop. So the first thing, it's a little bit different, is we just really actually put out a new update, version 1.2, and it's through Adobe's marketplace. And just if you're curious, Adobe just actually updated their marketplace. They happen to call it now the Adobe Exchange. But that's actually where this application lives. It lives in the Adobe marketplace because it's a plug-in into the Adobe technology. So if you just go to adobeexchange.com, you go into Creative Cloud. We're actually a featured app at this point. So if you scroll along the top, you should be able to see us somewhere. There we are, right here. The big map and the big Esri thing. The other thing you should be able to do is you can search. For example, if you type in map, we should come up, for example. And there we are there. And so if you go in here and you click on it, it'll give you some instructions about having your Creative Cloud account and all that kind of thing. And then in this case, obviously I've already installed it. But if you haven't installed it, this will say free. And you click on that and actually it'll install it into your desktop. So once it's installed, Where it is visibly inside of the application is inside of Illustrator and Photoshop, and again on a Mac and a PC it's more or less the same location, but if you go to Windows, Extensions, that's where it shows up. And if you open it, it comes with two primary windows, and so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start, and it's going to prompt me for a login. So there's two kind of options for your login. So this is actually interesting too. If you're a GIS person or if you're more of a designer, maybe you don't have an ArcGIS Online account. So we actually give complimentary access to the application. You don't have to have an ArcGIS Online account. You don't have to be a member of an organization. So if you have people within your organization, within your team, within your department who want to play around with this stuff, they can totally do that. It's a fully functioning free access to the application. So you just click on this, and all they would need to do is fill out their name, first name, last name, and give us an email address, and then we give them an activation code. And that's really it. So for the remainder of this demo, what I'm going to do is actually use my ArcGIS Online account. So I'll just click on this, go in here. Now if I've typed everything correctly, I should log in. So there is no license for this either. So you don't, if you're not the GIS administrator, you don't control all the named users, all that kind of stuff, that's okay. You just have to be a named user inside of an organization. Again, you have access to this application. So it's pretty easy to play around with it and get it and use it. So once you're in, again, there's two main windows, and like I said, there's the first one is really how you define your map extent. There's two options. One is you can go in here, the first button in what we call the Mapboard window, which defines your map extent. You can actually just pick a web map, an existing web map. So you can browse from ArcGIS Online location. So we've got some sample maps that we've pulled from ArcGIS Online and the Living Atlas that you can pull from. Or if you're in your organization, you can pull from those. Now, if you're pulling content from your own organization, there's a tagging structure, which I'll mention in a couple slides. But you can also pull in content from ArcGIS Online. And kind of what that looks like is, again, these are just web maps. So let me pick something here. The internet's a little bit slow, so hopefully this will draw okay. So I can just load a map. And this is, again, the map extent. This is not the map you're going to get in Illustrator. This is shows the extent of the map. And so there's a second window, which we call the Compilation window. It's the one with the eyeball. So you can access it from here, or you can access it from here. And then what this does is this, what we call the Compilation window, is actually the what you see is what you get view of the map before you download it. So in this simple case, we've got the light gray canvas, and there's a series of map services layers that are already added, and then I can simply download this map. And that's really the workflow, really simple. One of the actually even more simple ways of getting and sharing content is, again, if you've already got a web map created and you need to share that with a designer or someone else on the team who want to use this application, the easiest way of doing that is, instead of browsing, you can actually just enter in the URL to that ArcGIS Online item. So for example, if there's a specific web map that someone on your team has created and they've saved that to online and it's a publicly available item, or if it's in your organization, if it's within a group that's accessible besides yourself, all you need to do is give that person the URL to that ArcGIS Online item, put it in here, and then they can consume that map as well. So instead of having to browse and look for it, you could actually explicitly share that item as well. So that's a pretty easy way of sharing content between the GIS team and maybe the design team, or even yourself. So that's another way of doing it. So in this case, what I also wanted to show is that these two windows, the Mapboard window, just give myself a little more real estate here. I don't want to dock it. Make this a little bit smaller. And hide the TOC here. The other thing I wanted to show, again, let me manipulate my windows a little bit, give myself a little more real estate, are that these windows are linked. So if I make a change here, so you can tell here, once I toggle this button, I'm in more or less define my mapboard or edit mode. If I take this map and move it around, it actually moves around the window in real time. So if you make changes, for example, to the geographic position, if I grab the handles, make it bigger or smaller, the map becomes bigger and smaller as well. So all those edits are actually shown in real time. Let me just delete this, and I'm what I want to do is actually show a slightly different workflow. Instead of just loading in a map, what I want to do is I'm going to define a map interactively. So let me kind of zoom back out here. And what I can search for is I'm going to search for a location, so West Hollywood. So if I'm happy with this, let me zoom out a little bit. So instead of using this button, the first button, to pull in a specific web map, I'm going to interactively define my map extent and then look for content. So I'm just going to draw an extent, and you get an option. You get to name what we call our map board, which is your map. So just call it West Hollywood, WH for short. And this map board, you can think of it as the map extent, but when you actually download the map into Illustrator, it actually becomes the name of the Illustrator document. So that's what that thing, if I call it WH, once we download it, that's the name of the document that will be created in Illustrator. You have some options to now, this is a new feature that we just added, again, which was updated, I think, earlier this week. You can actually use preset document sizes that come loaded with Illustrator. So for example, if I want my map to be confined to a particular dimension, for example, I can pick web, I can say large, and I know that this map now will fit on the output medium that I want to do, which is going to be for web. And I can change the position of that map, or I can change the handles, but because I've told it I want to fit it on 1024 by 1286. Even if I change this, notice that the scale of the map is changing. You can see those numbers there on the bottom, dynamically updating, but you're constrained to the artboard size that you defined, which is actually really handy. So once we've done that, now I'm going to go over here, and let me minimize this window so we've got, again, a little more real estate here. What I want to do is show off a couple of the features inside the application. So if you click here, you've got a series of the standard base maps. There's a little icon in the upper right-hand corner. It looks like a little pixel grid. If it's a pixel grid, it's a cached base map. So you can use the cached base maps. But obviously, those will come through as raster images inside of Illustrator or Photoshop. There are two custom vector maps that you can see up here as well. There's one that's based on natural earth, and then there's one that we call vector street map, which is actually street map premium data behind the scenes. So here, if you're familiar with that data set. So you can use that. That's the one I typically recommend to customers is if you're working inside of Illustrator, you probably want to use this vector street map as your your default base map. All this content that you're seeing here in the preview window, that will actually be vector layers when it gets downloaded. So this is our starting point. Now maybe I want to add some additional layers to the map. So what I can do is click the add and search content. So we've got some options here. Again, now you can actually add layers from all the same locations, from your organization, from the Living Atlas or ArcGIS Online, so you can do that as well. Or again, if you know the URL to that specific layer, that specific service, you can actually just put that in here and then load that layer as well that way. You can override and start with a whole new web map. The other thing you can do is do a geo search, or you can add places. So for example, I can type in here, I can type in a specific address or a named location. So for example, let's do everybody's favorite coffee shop. And then you can actually see, if I hover over this, hopefully you can see the push pins showing up for those individual Starbucks locations. So then you can just add those, or if I choose to, I can do add all, and I'll get all my Starbucks. So there's a couple ways if you can add data here as well. And that will show up as a new layer over here. And the other thing that's inside this application is once you add that layer, you have access to smart mapping. So the same smart mapping UI user experience that you have in ArcGIS Online and in Pro is also embedded in this application. So again, when I talk about this, I think of this as more data visualization, not necessarily design. And again, knowing that this tool is used kind of to bridge the gap between the GIS world and the design world, designers think about design slightly differently than the GIS world does. So when I show off smart mapping and I talk about it, really, it's you want to prep and organize your data and symbolize your data visualize it in a way that makes sense. There's things that it does, for example, where I can change the symbol, and it's visual, but it's really not data classification. So that'll make a little more sense, and I'll show that with some other options as well. So we can do places, and we can also add layers from files. So what file formats are supported? The typical ones: a CSV, text file, shape, and again, this new update that came out a couple days ago, we now add KML or KMZ. So you can add in those files as well. So you can just browse to disk. In this case here, I'm going to pick a sample CSV file. I'm going to load that in. You can see those points. So let me turn off that layer. And again, I'm going to do a little bit of data visualization here again. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to base it on type. And again, so this, again, I wouldn't call this design, I would call this data visualization. You can see the different types of locations. We've got office, retail, hotel, and other. And in this case, what I want to do is I just want to quickly make the symbols a little more visible for this demo and just make sure the classifications are correct. So now that I've done that, I could simply download this map into Illustrator and then do my design work in Illustrator. What I want to show is one of the couple of the additional features that you can do. So Adobe Illustrator has this concept of symbols, brushes, or brushes and swatches. And so if you use those, what you can actually do is more or less set up a mapping. So I'm going to my settings, and if you do have these what they call library files, which are just Adobe Illustrator files that have defined named symbols, you can actually point to those. So this is just pointing to an Adobe Illustrator file on disk that has a series of symbol libraries. And once you do that, what you can do is we have this option called processes. And you have the ability to turn on a remapping of symbols, ArcGIS symbols, to Adobe Illustrator symbols. And that's just using this use custom symbol libraries. And so now that I have my data classification set up as residential, office, retail, and hotel, and they have the very generic symbols here, what happens if I run this with this checked on the download? Let me do that real quickly. Hopefully this will take, the internet's pretty fast. What this will do is as the map is being downloaded, it will automatically replace these symbols with the symbols that were in my Illustrator library automatically for me. So you can kind of speed up that process, that design process. If you have a particular style or symbol or brand that you want to use, you can actually set that up in Illustrator and then reuse that. So this will take probably about a minute or so to run, minute and a half to run. So I'll let this run for a couple seconds here as it downloads. And let me just kick back to the PowerPoint presentation for a few more slides. So I mentioned there's the Mapboard window. So again, that's where you set your geographic extent, your scale, your extent, the size of the map. Again, you can define it interactively or from an existing web map, which I showed you. You have this enable and disable edit mode. So if you want to change your map extent, you have to be in more or less the edit mode. If you want to pan or navigate on the map, you have to be out of edit mode. One thing to note is this Mapboard window is not a preview of the map. Again, it's just an extent of what the map is before you download it. And then there's the compilation window that actually shows you the map before it gets downloaded. So again, the compilation, this is a preview of the map. So again, I showed you that a little bit earlier. You can browse content from ArcGIS Online, the Living Atlas, or from your organization. Now, if you're not going to be using the URL to the web item to bring in content, if you have content within your organization, you probably have a lot of content. There's lots of web maps, there's lots of layers, and maybe not all those layers are appropriate to be shared to these sets of users or to this application. So we don't show you everything. If you actually want to see the content in this application from your organization, it has to be inside of a group that has an M4CC tag. And so that's a way to kind of hold back, let's say, some of the content in your organization from being visible to this application and these users potentially. So if you go into your organization and say, hey, I'm not seeing anything, that's the reason why. You have to do that one additional step to take that item, and you don't need to tag the individual items, you just need to make a group, tag that group with this tag, M4CC, and then share it with that group. And as soon as you do that, then that content becomes visible inside of the application. The other thing you might want to do is, obviously, when you're sharing this, especially if you're consuming it or want to consume it as vector content, when that service is published, ArcGIS Online, make sure that query is enabled. Query enabled means, for us, for this application, that we can consume that as actual vector content. And that's really handy, specifically for Illustrator. For Photoshop, it's obviously not a big deal because Photoshop is raster-based anyway. I mentioned the files that you can add. And then you can also change the layers, the base map, and you can also change the projection as well. Then we sync. So this is the process that I'm actually executing now. Let me just check back to see if it's done. If it's, oh, Illustrator wants my attention. So it goes. So I'll just let that run for a little bit here. So it's downloading now, and it's just adding up a few of the additional layers. So I'll kick back again here. And then I'll take questions as this is running as well. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is Photoshop. So again, I was demonstrating Illustrator. This extension works more or less the same in Photoshop as it does in Illustrator. The difference being is if you're familiar with Illustrator and Photoshop, Illustrator is primarily vector-based. Illustrator keeps wanting to take control. Is vector-based, Photoshop is raster-based. So any content that you're pulling into Photoshop will remain as raster. So again, primarily it's useful for image services and cache-based maps and those types of things. And you can sync multiple times as well. The other thing is inside of Photoshop, there's no replacing of symbols or anything like that. It's just more or less a download of the raster content in that sense. So quickly, I want to leave a couple minutes for questions. Here are some resources. So if you want to take a picture of this, you can do that. That's the install location. That's the short URL, or you can go directly to the Adobe Exchange. There's a series of demos and tutorials up on YouTube, and you can see the URL for that, our documentation, and our user community forum. So if you're on GeoNet, this is the place I'd recommend going, talking with other users, asking the team questions, enhancements, those types of things. And we just specifically set up a Twitter account just for this app just recently. So we're trying to get a little bit of momentum on that. So if you're interested in this app and want to hear about updates and things of that nature, I'd follow this Twitter account as well. And so let me kick back to Illustrator, and it's done, successfully downloaded, and I'll just wrap this up with this really quickly. So here you can see now the generic GIS symbols have been replaced with these more elaborate symbols that came from the Illustrator library. And the other thing I wanted to show quickly is this organized structure. So here's the layers inside of Illustrator, and what you'll notice is a couple things. One, obviously, as I hover over here in Illustrator, you'll notice that everything is vector because of that map that I chose. And again, if you look over here, the layer structure is really well organized. So for example, we have labels. All my labels are on the labels layer, and then they have sublayers based on populated places. If you go down, for example, to transportation, all the things are on the transportation layers. The freeways are on a sublayer called freeways. So again, when we talk about bringing in and sharing content from the GIS world to the design world, again, the term we use is design ready. Design ready meaning that you get a clean, organized structure, and now you can really just focus inside of Illustrator and Photoshop on the design work, not so much of where is this thing? Is this inside of a clipping path? Where is this? Why is this on this layer? I can't find this. So we're trying to give you a really clean, organized structure, and that's really the main purpose of this application. And with that, I will conclude, and we've got 2 minutes for questions. So, lady here in front. Yeah, so the question is on the symbol replacement, is it based purely on name? It is. So in the symbol library in Illustrator, the name was residential, hotel, or whatever. And then in the Smart Map renderer, the symbol class, exactly. So it's one, and even, I think it's even case sensitive. So it's very, very explicit. But yeah, that's exactly how it works. Another question? All right, so the question is, once you pull in that content, either the web map or the individual layers, does it maintain a live link to that? No. It is a static snapshot of the map. Now what you can do, and I didn't show in the demo, is you can sync multiple times, right? So if you take a snapshot, again, sync the data, it'll render what was visible at the time when you download it into Illustrator. If that layer changes, you can download it again a second time. You'd have to delete the existing layer and sync it again, but that's the way it worked. That being said, the link back to the web map only exists in the current AI session. So if you close it, you actually lose the complete link, and that's something that we're working on for our future enhancement to keep that link maintained longer term. Yeah, so does it, yeah, so there's a little bit of work there. So if, for example, that layer changes and someone's done some design work in Illustrator and they resync it, do they lose that work? Currently they do, yes. Yeah, so there is a little bit of a workflow there where, again, if you're going to do the design work, ideally the layer is, pretty static at that point. There's a question over here, yep. So they're all editable text strings. So I don't know if you can. Cool, great, thank you. Yay! Yeah, so yeah, it's all. Yep, pure editable text. Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. Yeah, so and I didn't show it, but I can go back here really quickly. Oh, sorry. Over here. For example, so the text you see in Illustrator there, the road names, that's coming from this vector street map. If you add in local data, you can also label it as well, right? So type, let me just make it again really large so you can actually see it. So that will come through as well. So you got some different, and that'll come through as editable text as well. So again, you can change the font here, I think to some degree, or maybe you can't. I'm not sure. Yeah. So again, it's less about the design, but again, on the post-process side in Illustrator, you just use typekit like you would normally would. Yeah. Any other questions? No? Cool. Great. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your conference.